Hello and welcome to Tech 24 here on France 24. I'm Tom Burgess-Watson, filling in for Rebecca Bowring. Well, coming up in today's programme, a tale of telephony, conspiracy and hypocrisy. On the one hand, the West champions a free and democratic cyberspace, but on the other, could there be some cases of double standards at work? We explore the shady business of selling surveillance technology to repressive regimes. Plus, hardened travelers out there, take note. We'll be taking a look at what claims to be the world's toughest satellite phone that lets you keep in touch no matter how remote your location. It's proving quite a hit with journalists, but not with dictators. All will be revealed in Test 24. But first, technology has its plus points, like most things, but it also has a dark side. Until a few weeks ago, Muammar Gaddafi's team was working overtime trying to keep tabs on the enemies of that regime. And a surveillance room has now been uncovered in Tripoli, and it's revealed quite an Aladdin's cave of Western-made technology. Well, to help us shed light on this, I'm joined by our resident tech editor, Eric Olander. Eric, could there be a case of some double standards at work here?
There are some very embarrassed faces right now in Paris, in Washington, and other cities around the world, major capitals in the West, where they are looking at the role that technology was played in Muammar Gaddafi's 42 years of suppressing his own people, using the internet and intercepting phone calls and intercepting emails and all sorts of electronic surveillance. Papers have been found in the past several days and weeks since the fall of Muammar Gaddafi that indicate that American and European technology companies were providing the technology to intercept those messages. So, in fact, there is this perception of a double standard, in part because people like U.S. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton go around the world talking about the internet freedom agenda, when in fact it is Western technology companies, many from the United States, that are selling the very tools that suppress people. So that's where this double standard comes from.
And what was the scale of this? I mean, could it be the case that people lost their lives as a direct result of this kind of technology?
It's very hard to make that connection. What we do know is that Muammar Gaddafi was very intent on listening to his enemies, identifying his enemies, and potentially killing them. The killing part is very, very difficult. Was it the fact that this person sent an email, or was it the fact that they found, using other means of intelligence, captured this person? So drawing that correlation is very, very difficult. What we do know is that in places like Libya, in China, Iran, Syria, Russia, and other authoritarian countries, technology like this is used very, very aggressively to penetrate the communications of its own citizens.
All right, and what about the legality of it? Is it a sort of free-for-all selling such technology in the open market?
Well, this is really a gray area. The West will tell you that they've got what they call dual-use restrictions on certain technologies. That is, technologies that can be used both for consumer and non-lethal and non-aggressive means, and those who are used for military or, some more kind of insidious, ideas. So the problem here is this is new, and we don't really quite know what technology is being used for oppressive means. So people will say this is a server; it's not being used for anything, illegitimate. When in fact that server, loaded with this type of technology, can be used to oppress. There's also a very important gray market. So companies like Cisco will tell you we're not selling to the Chinese directly, or we're not selling to the Syrians directly, but there's middlemen who are, and that's really hard to police. So it is a big, big gray area that authoritarian governments are taking advantage of.
All right, so it's not just Libya, it's all over the world, and it sounds like we need a rule book.
It sounds like we need a rule book, but who's going to enforce that rule book? I mean, this is the same rule book that we need to enforce drugs, and we need to enforce, the ivory trade. All of these things, where there's a demand, there will always be a supply. One very important final note, this is not just happening in repressive regimes. This packet inspection and these ways of snooping in on people's communications are also being used in the West under the laws like the Patriot Act of the United States. ISPs are also using this to find people who download illegal music. So at the same time, these tools are not exclusively being used in places like Libya, but also here in France and in the United States.
All right, Eric Olander, thank you very much indeed for that. Well, stay with us because coming up, it's Test 24. All right, it's time now for a look at this week's gadget. Now, Eric, you've brought something along with you here, which is proving quite a hit with the seasoned hardcore travelers.
This is indeed for a seasoned hardcore traveler. This is the Thuraya XT satellite phone. Now, this is the type of phone that a couple years ago would have weighed, 3 or 4 times its size right now, so it's relatively small. This is a sat phone, so it doesn't use cell phone signals like the phones that you and I have here today. But what's impressive about it, both is the size and also the subscription plan. The pricing has come down dramatically over the past few years. Just takes 20 euros a month for a subscription to this and €1 a minute. Just a few few years ago, that was 3 or 4 times as well. So satellite phone technology now, the pricing and the accessibility has come down all the way to the point where it's still probably above the level for the average consumer, but a very critical tool for companies working in places where you don't have good cell phone connections.
Right, I was going to say, does that work pretty much everywhere on the planet?
Well, this particular model has some limitations to it. It doesn't work in the United States just because they don't have access to certain satellites there. Not really a huge problem because cell phone connectivity and telecommunications connectivity in the U.S. is pretty good. It also doesn't work in some of the poles in the North and South Pole. But pretty much everywhere else, they say it does give you a good phone connection. So if you're in the middle of a bush or desert or somewhere that doesn't have cell phone reception, this might be your device.
And if the prices are coming down, as you said, could this be the future of mobile telephony?
Unlikely, only because the prices are also coming down in cell phone technology to the point where they're much cheaper. They're priced in pennies, not in dollars, or not in euros here. So unlikely that this will compete with everyday cell phones, but it will definitely open up a whole sector of telecommunications where we haven't had one before. Also, very importantly, this brought up, Gaddafi last week. There was some news that came out that he was going to kill anybody who was using this particular phone, and in part because he did not or may not have had the technology to intercept these calls that were made on these phones. However, satellite calls are not immune to interception by governments or other people. As we know, Osama bin Laden was using cell phones and sat phones like this until he was tracked by the National Security Agency in the United States. So therefore, this is not immune, not protected from interception, but an easier way of making a call when you don't have regular cell connections.
And going back to what we were saying earlier, it might just be a case that Gaddafi hadn't got round to buying the technology to intercept that.
He may have not understood the technology. He may not have acquired it. We don't quite know, but he was threatened by this particular phone.
All right, Eric Olender, that just about brings to an end this edition of Tech 24. Thank you very much for watching. You can keep in touch with us. Details appearing there on your screens. Just before we go, we're going to leave you with an extract now from this year's winning entry at the France 24 Radio France International Web Documentary Competition. It's made by 2 French journalists, and at their online media feature takes us on a rather haunting trip to Chernobyl. And on that rather bleak note, we leave you. Thanks for watching. Do stay tuned. More news coming up on France 24.